beginning at the 32nd verse. They were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. They were amazed, and those who followed were afraid. He took the 12 aside again and began to tell them what was to happen to him, saying, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem. The Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests, the scribes, and they will condemn him to death. Then they will hand him over to the Gentiles. They will mock him and spit upon him, flog him and kill him, and after 3 days he will rise again." James and John, the son of Zebedee, came forward to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one on your right hand and one on your left, in your glory." You know, one of the things that continues to stand out to me as we watch the disciples move towards Jerusalem with Jesus is that they still just don't get it. Have you figured that out? These men have been with Jesus now for almost 3 years, and they still don't get it. The section begins with the verses talking about them going up to Jerusalem. They're on the road to Jerusalem. Remember, they bypassed Galilee so they wouldn't be distracted by all the folks. We heard about that last week. We remember earlier that Jesus has set his face to go to Jerusalem. His conversation has changed, and we understand that because later on when they actually sit down and pen these words of what happened that you and I read, they remember that Jesus was different. He was intentional in this walking towards Jerusalem. And he wants to let them know what is about to happen in his life. And he doesn't share that with all of the people who are following behind. In fact, what it says about those folks is that they were amazed, and those who followed were afraid. Clearly, as Jesus is walking towards Jerusalem, his demeanor and his intent and purpose in going to Jerusalem seems to have made the disciples, even those fringe disciples, a little nervous. Has caused them to begin to say that they're afraid. Oh, certainly they're amazed. Some of them remember, and they've been telling and retelling the stories of what he'd done in their presence, the miracles that they've seen, but maybe his newest conversation started to do more than amaze them. It started to make them fear. Afraid for Jesus. Afraid that he was losing it, that the popularity was going by the wayside, and if his popularity went, then theirs was waning as well. Afraid for themselves if what he's talking about really does come true. How is that going to rub off on our life? If we've been so close to him and now in Jerusalem they do these things, what will it mean to us? Is it time to cut our ties with him so that whatever bad happens to him doesn't include us? But that small band of disciples, that intimate group that he's had, they fail to understand as well. In fact, unlike the crowd of followers, as they're going towards Jerusalem, Jesus pulls them aside. That's what it says. He took the 12 aside and began to tell them what was going to happen to him. "See, we're going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they're going to condemn him to death. They'll hand him over to the Gentiles, and they'll mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him, and 3 days later he will rise again." They were being warned. They were being prepared. Jesus was giving him all that they could so that during the time of alienation that was to come, the suffering that they were going to have to endure when he went to the cross. The Messiah is telling them, you know, the picture we talked about the kingdom coming, it's not for this moment. For this moment is something else. This moment is not about sitting on thrones and about the king being present among us. This is about death and about crucifixion. God has another plan. I will die at the hand of the religious leaders. They will turn me over to Gentiles who will mock and kill him, and on the third day he will arise. But the disciples just don't get it, do they? The words aren't hardly out of his mouth before it says, James and John raise their hand and go, excuse me, I have a question. Jesus, I hear what you're saying, but I have a question. On the day when you come into power, the day when you actually sit on the throne, can you grant us that we can sit on your right and your left? I told you they didn't get it. Jesus is preparing them to endure. When he dies on the cross, there's going to be 3 days of utter aloneness. And if they have done this to him, what might they do to his followers? But Jesus says, my Father knows about it. In 3 days, I'll be resurrected. But that's not what they're worried about. They're worried about, am I going to have done the best job? You know, Jesus, when it comes the day and you get to sit on your throne, am my brother and I going to have done well enough that we can sit on your right and your left-hand side? You know, are we going to have figured it out well enough, and we're going to have performed well enough, and we're going to be successful enough in the kingdom that when the day comes and you sit on your throne, can we sit on either side of you? If they heard the words, they just didn't mean anything. They were interested in, where am I? And Jesus was trying to allow them to know what they would need to survive. At one point when I was in South Florida, because we were starting up an Emmaus community, a good number of members of my congregation and the members of Christ Church in Fort Lauderdale got together on a real regular basis. And we prayed and we began the work of this new Emmaus community. And one of the things was, so often I kept hearing the folks at Christ Church repeat a prayer over and over. So I asked their senior pastor about it, and I said, you know, what's going on? And he said, well, it's one of the things we require them to memorize. If you become a part of our church, we require you to memorize some things. And he said, one of them is this particular prayer, and we do it at church meetings, and we do it at staff meetings, and we do it at all the small groups, and we do it at every leadership meeting, and so they're accustomed to the prayer. And I said, oh, okay. The prayer has a lot of little intricate parts, and it's not very difficult, and it's really very short. But there was one part of it that really kind of stood out to me. Because part of the prayer asked God to teach me to stand where you're blessing instead of praying that you will bless where I am standing. I was on one of the retreats with the members of the church there, and they had recited that prayer, you know, at the closing exercise or the closing activity that night before we all went off to bed, and I went back to my room and got a shower. And all of a sudden it made perfect sense. How often have I stood, you know, someplace and said, Lord, I'd like to just get covered up in your glory, only to remember that the shower's in that room. I thought to myself, what a wise prayer. Why don't I start paying attention to where God is in my life, and instead of standing here and say, Lord, I'm ready to take my shower tonight, I'm ready for you to bless me, just cover me up with your blessings. Why don't I just learn to go walk into the bathroom where the shower is? I turned the hot water in there and I heard it beating down and I was getting undressed and I thought to myself, that's really what that prayer is all about, is just being smart enough to quit asking God to give me a shower wherever I'm standing and go stand where the shower is. Go stand where God is already blessing in my life. You and I need Lent, folks. I don't know if we ever think about it. We need these days that Jesus takes approaching the cross. Have you noticed how much of Scripture is taken up with this Lenten time? How many of the stories of his life take place in these last days as they move toward the cross? There are truths you and I have to know. There's things that Jesus desires to speak into our lives. There's courage and there's stamina for the days ahead that he wants us to be filled up with. We need Lent. We need to stop looking at all the stuff Jesus is doing in the world around us and think about his walking with us at this moment. Lent ought to be one of our favorite times of the year. Oh, I know Christmas has got its presents and family that gathers around. And at Easter time we talk about new life and eternal life that he promises with us. But Lent was that time when Jesus just set some time aside to walk very closely with his disciples. You know how significant that is? If we allow it to be. I told you, Linda and I came back to this area, and it really is an absolute joy to come back because it brings up more memories than you would ever know. And we happened to be looking the other day at something, and I saw the picture again, and I said, bandana color hasn't changed at all. And she said, nope. Years ago, before we were engaged, before we were married, we were just dating. And I was a college student, and that means I didn't have a whole lot of money, so I did the typical college students things with her. We lived close to a beach, so we used to walk late at night on the beach, and it was about 11 o'clock. And I said, let's go to the beach and walk for a while. That's because I probably didn't have 2 cents in my pocket. I didn't have to do anything else. So we're walking along the beach, and we held hands, and we talked, and we visited. And at one point, we just sat down on the beach. You know, kind of watched the clouds and watched the moon over everything and the stars. And as we sat there, somewhere about midnight or so, this wonderful turtle came up out of the sea, about 25 yards away. Made her way up to the beach, up past where we were into the high area, and began digging her nest. And I just kind of sat and looked, and Linda sat and looked, and we watched. Now, this was back before turtle watches, so please don't report me to the turtle people, okay? She'd gotten real involved with depositing all of her eggs. And when she got really involved with that, I said to Linda, have you ever seen this? And she said no. And I said, well, come on, we'll go up and take a look. And so I went up behind her, real quiet and gentle, and I began digging out a space back where she couldn't see until it had fallen away enough that Linda and I could watch as she deposited her eggs, you know, one after another after another. When she was just about finished, I pushed it back, and we backed away and sat down and watched her turn around and cover those eggs up. When it was all patted down, I told you it was a long night, she wandered back and tired out back down to the sea. It's been over 40 years since we saw that. I can remember the feel of her hand. Jesus had a short time left with his disciples, and he just wanted to walk with them. He just wanted to spend time. If you look at the story of the of the night when he sits and has communion with them, what you find is he's even asked God for the privilege of this one last meal together. Jesus is intimately aware of what you and I call the Lenten season. It was his last opportunity to walk hand in hand with his disciples. It was the last feel of their presence. It was the last time that he would share with them the things that he wanted to tell them more than anything else. Jesus was going to Jerusalem. He was going to be mocked and scourged and killed, but in 3 days, guys, he will arise. These days of walking would be forever in their memory and forever in his memory. The days of Lent, as you and I walk with Jesus this year, can be days that will live with us forever, as he gives us strength not only for today but for months and even years ahead. Are you taking time during this Lenten season just to walk with Jesus? Or are you hurrying on to Easter? Are you taking time to listen to what he says? Are you looking for the blessings that are already being showered into your life? Or are you like the disciples, wanting him to bless something else that happens to be on your mind at the moment? Lent is an enormously powerful season for you and I to connect with the Jesus who loves us so much. Don't let it slip away.